fluorescent banks hum at 60 Hz in sublevel 3, same frequency as the power grid, same as my anxiety when the circuits get quiet. 2300 hours, and I'm 3 coffees deep into a 12-hour shift monitoring strategic air command frequencies. The communications hub stretches 40 feet in each direction, banks of receivers and transmitters arranged in perfect military geometry. Each station monitors a different theater: Arctic patrol routes, Pacific deterrent flights, Atlantic reconnaissance sweeps. I adjust my headset and scan the primary board. Green lights across all active frequencies. Bravo Wing should check in at 2,315 hours, same as they have for the past 6 months of these deterrent rotations. Tonight's patrol covers North Pacific sectors 7 through 12, standard nuclear configuration. The kind of flight that keeps the balance, keeps everyone honest about what sleeping giants patrol our skies. My fingers find their usual rhythm, tapping the frequency selector. Habit developed over 18 months in this chair, watching the same patterns repeat. Check primary comm monitor backup channel. Verify encryption protocols. The work becomes meditation when nothing goes wrong, which is how it's supposed to be in nuclear deterrence. Boring equals successful. The console displays tonight's flight pattern, sectors 7 through 12 in a standard deterrent sweep. For aircraft, 2 B-2 Spirit bombers with nuclear payload packages, 2 F-22 Raptors providing escort coverage. Call signs rotate weekly for operational security, but tonight's formation runs under Blackbird designation. The lead bomber shows Colonel Reese commanding, and that familiar tightness in my chest eases slightly. Flew transport missions with Reese in Afghanistan before I transferred to strategic communications. Best pilot I've served with, steady hands when everything else shakes apart. 2,315 hours arrives with digital precision. Pentagon Communications, this is Blackbird lead requesting routine check-in. The voice should crackle through my headset, static-edged but clear. Should hear Reese's Oklahoma drawl cutting through the ionospheric interference. Nothing. I tap the frequency selector, thinking maybe I caught the wrong channel. Commercial aviation frequencies bleed through sometimes, especially during solar flare activity. The backup channel hisses with empty static. I switch to the emergency frequency. Blackbird lead, Pentagon Communications on guard frequency, please respond. The speakers give me nothing but white noise, that particular quality of silence that means the airwaves are open but nobody's transmitting. My training kicks in automatically. Standard operating procedure, 4 to 7 for loss of communication with nuclear-capable aircraft. Step 1. Attempt contact on all assigned frequencies. Step 2. Verify equipment functionality. Step 3. If no response within 10 minutes, initiate immediate recall protocol. I run through the checklist with mechanical precision. Primary frequency, static. Secondary channel, static. Emergency guard frequency, static. The equipment diagnostics panel shows all systems functioning within normal parameters. Signal strength indicators register appropriate levels for the flight's current sector position. Everything operates exactly as designed, which makes the silence more wrong than any equipment failure. The shift supervisor sits 20 feet behind me, monitoring the overnight operations summary. Major Hendricks, transferred from Missile Command 6 months ago, carries himself with that particular stiffness of someone who's spent too many years sitting next to nuclear launch keys. I turn in my chair to catch his attention. Major, I've lost contact with Bravo Wing. No response on any frequency for 12 minutes. Hendricks doesn't look up from his paperwork. His pen continues moving across the status report with methodical strokes. Equipment malfunction? Negative. All systems show green. This looks like communication blackout from their end. Now he glances at me, and something in his expression doesn't match the situation. Too calm, like he's been expecting this conversation. Continue monitoring standard frequencies. Log the interruption as routine communication difficulty. The words hit wrong, like static in a clear signal. SOP 4 to 7 doesn't classify 12-minute communication loss as routine difficulty. At 15 minutes, we're supposed to initiate recall procedures automatically. At 20 minutes, we scramble search and rescue. At 30 minutes, we brief the Joint Chiefs on potential nuclear asset loss. Sir, protocol requires recall initiation at 15-minute mark. We're at 13 minutes now. Hendricks sets down his pen with deliberate care. Your protocol is to monitor communications and log status reports. Continue mission parameters as filed. Mission parameters. Not flight parameters or patrol parameters, but mission parameters. The distinction crawls up my spine like cold static. Deterrent flights operate under flight parameters, routine patrols with no specific mission objectives beyond maintaining strategic presence. Mission parameters imply targeting packages, specific objectives, authorized engagement protocols. I check the mission board where tonight's operations are logged. Bravo Wing shows standard deterrent rotation, duration 8 hours, return to Whiteman scheduled for 0400 hours. But if Hendricks is referencing mission parameters, there's documentation I haven't been briefed on, orders that weren't in the standard rotation package. Major, could I review the mission parameters? Want to ensure I'm following correct protocol. His stare could freeze helium. You have all necessary information for your duties, Lieutenant. Monitor the frequencies and maintain your log. 15 minutes pass. The regulation requires me to log loss of communication, recall protocol initiated, and begin broadcasting recall codes on all emergency frequencies. My hand hovers over the keyboard, cursor blinking in the incident log field. Behind me, I can feel Hendricks watching, waiting to see if I'll follow regulations or follow orders. The fluorescent hum seems louder now, mixing with the static from empty frequencies. Somewhere over the Pacific, for aircraft carrying enough nuclear firepower to crater a city, are flying in radio silence, and my supervisor is telling me to log it as routine. I type, 2,327 hours, Bravo Wing communication interruption, continuing monitoring per supervisor guidance. It's the first regulation I've bent in an official Pentagon log. The words look wrong on the screen, sanitized text that should read differently, should reflect the growing wrongness spreading through my chest like interference in a clear signal. 20 minutes. According to every manual I've studied, every training simulation I've completed, 20 minutes of communication loss with nuclear assets requires immediate escalation to theater command. But Hendricks hasn't moved from his desk, continues reviewing paperwork as if 4 bombers going dark is administrative routine. I check the equipment again, running full diagnostics on all transmission arrays. Everything functions perfectly. The problem isn't on our end, which means either Bravo Wing has experienced complete electrical failure, unlikely with redundant systems, or they've deliberately ceased communication. The thought arrives like a frequency I shouldn't be monitoring. What if this isn't communication failure? What if this is communication protocol? I pull up the flight roster and cross-reference tonight's crew assignments. Reese commanding Blackbird lead. Captain Morrison in Blackbird 2. Both pilots with impeccable service records, both cleared for nuclear delivery missions, both following orders from somewhere up the chain of command where lieutenants don't get briefed. At 25 minutes, I try one more time. Blackbird lead, Pentagon Communications, please acknowledge. The static hisses back at me, but underneath it, barely audible, I catch something that might be carrier wave interference. A signal present but not transmitting, like someone's listening but not talking. Like they're maintaining radio silence on purpose. Major, I call back to Hendricks without turning around. Getting possible carrier wave detection. They might be monitoring but not responding. Log it as continued communication difficulty. No further action required. No further action required. The phrase echoes in the communications hub, bouncing off equipment racks and disappearing into the steady electronic hum. In nuclear protocol, there's always further action required. The entire system is built on redundancy, on backup plans for backup plans, on the assumption that silence equals potential catastrophe, unless silence equals something else entirely. I lean back in my chair and stare at the mission board. 4 green dots representing Bravo Wing continue their patrol pattern, transponder signals functioning normally, aircraft systems operational, nuclear payloads armed and ready. They're not in distress. They're not lost. They're just not talking to us. And my supervisor already knows why. The fluorescent hum continues at exactly 60 Hz, same as it has all night, same as it will until 0700 hours when the day shift arrives. But something fundamental has shifted in sublevel 3, some frequency I can't quite tune into, a signal broadcasting on channels I'm not authorized to monitor. 30 minutes of silence and counting. 37 minutes of silence, and my regulations training wars against the growing certainty that something beyond communication failure is happening tonight. The manual says search and rescue coordination should have started 7 minutes ago. The manual also says to follow supervisor guidance, and Hendricks continues reviewing his paperwork like 4 nuclear bombers going dark is clerical routine. I pull up the communication logs on my secondary terminal, scrolling back through tonight's entries. Standard check-ins from Arctic patrol routes, Atlantic reconnaissance sweeps, Pacific deterrent flights. Everything normal until Bravo Wing's scheduled 2,315 contact. But as I examine the transmission records more carefully, patterns emerge that shouldn't be there. The Arctic Patrol checked in at 2,312, 3 minutes early. Atlantic Reconnaissance reported at 2,318, 3 minutes late. Small deviations that individually mean nothing, but collectively suggest coordinated timing adjustments. Like clearing communication windows for something that required radio silence. I cross-reference the flight manifests with tonight's global positioning data. Bravo Wing's transponder signals show them maintaining standard patrol pattern over sectors 7 through 12, but the sector boundaries listed in tonight's routing seem different from last week's identical mission profile. Subtle coordinate shifts, maybe 2 degrees north, pushing their patrol envelope closer to international airspace boundaries. Hendricks, I call over my shoulder, abandoning military courtesy protocols. These sector coordinates don't match standard Pacific deterrent routing. His pen stops moving. The silence stretches long enough that I turn to look at him directly. His expression carries that particular emptiness of someone choosing words very carefully. Routing adjustments occur regularly based on operational requirements. Your clearance covers communication monitoring, not flight planning. The deflection feels rehearsed, like he's been preparing for this question. But my clearance level includes access to standard patrol modifications. Routine routing changes get logged in the communication hub specifically, so we can maintain contact with aircraft in shifted sectors. These coordinate modifications weren't logged anywhere I can access. I dig deeper into the system logs, cross-referencing tonight's communication patterns with historical data. The database shows standard transmission protocols for every strategic flight over the past 6 months, including atmospheric interference adjustments, equipment performance variations, and routine communication delays. Tonight's pattern breaks every established norm. Previous deterrent flights in sectors 7 through 12 show consistent communication intervals. Check-ins every 15 minutes, position reports every 30 minutes, equipment status updates hourly. Standard protocol designed specifically to maintain constant contact with nuclear assets. Tonight's flight manifest shows identical requirements, identical crew certifications, identical communication expectations. But the actual communication log shows something else entirely. Radio silence that started exactly at the scheduled check-in time, not gradually like equipment failure would progress. Immediate, complete, coordinated silence from 4 separate aircraft with independent communication systems. The probability of simultaneous equipment failure across multiple redundant systems approaches statistical impossibility. Major, maintenance logs show all equipment functioning normally during the communication loss. This appears to be intentional radio silence from Bravo Wing. Hendricks sets his paperwork aside and stands. For the first time tonight, I have his complete attention, and something in his posture suggests I've crossed into territory where lieutenant-level questions aren't welcome. Your equipment analysis is noted. Continue monitoring assigned frequencies. The dismissal carries weight, but 43 minutes of nuclear silence has pushed me past the point where dismissals work. I pull up the personnel database and cross-reference tonight's flight crews with their communication protocols training. Every pilot in Bravo Wing holds advanced certification in emergency communication procedures. They know every frequency, every backup channel, every redundant system designed to maintain contact with strategic command. Colonel Reese completed emergency communication recertification 6 weeks ago. Perfect scores on all simulations, including scenarios specifically designed around communication array failures, atmospheric interference, and equipment malfunction. The training records show he practiced maintaining contact with Pentagon communications under every possible degraded condition. If Reese wanted to communicate with us tonight, he'd find a way. I accessed the encrypted communication protocols, the secondary channels reserved for sensitive transmission during nuclear operations. Most require authentication codes beyond my clearance level, but monitoring capability comes standard with my position. The backup frequencies show activity, not voice communication, but data bursts, encrypted packets transmitting between aircraft and unknown receiving stations. Major, I'm detecting encrypted data transmission on backup channels. Bravo Wing is communicating, just not with us. This gets Hendricks moving. He crosses to my station with military precision, but something has shifted in his demeanor. The calculated calm replaced by controlled urgency. He examines my display showing the encrypted data patterns, traces the signal strength indicators with his finger, then does something I've never seen a supervisor do during active nuclear operations. He logs into his command terminal, using authorization codes I didn't know existed at our clearance level. The system responds with displays I've never seen before. Mission status boards showing classified operation designations, communication protocols labeled with code names not in any manual I've studied, coordination interfaces connecting to stations beyond Pentagon communications. Lieutenant, you're about to be briefed on operational security requirements beyond your original clearance level. The classification brief takes 90 seconds, delivered in the mechanical tone reserved for information that could end careers or lives depending on how it's handled. Tonight's operation runs under Strategic Authentication Protocol 7, which exists specifically for nuclear missions requiring communication isolation from standard Pentagon oversight. The bombers are following legitimate orders, just orders that don't appear in any system I'm authorized to access. Operation frequency clear, Hendricks explains, pulling up displays that show real-time coordination between Bravo Wing, Strategic Command, and what appears to be a mobile command center designated as Raven Station. Communication blackout with Pentagon Communications is intentional, required for operational security during authorized nuclear delivery mission. Authorized nuclear delivery mission. The words hit like cold physics, reshaping everything I thought I understood about tonight's operations. This isn't a deterrent patrol or routine flight exercise. For bombers carrying live nuclear payloads are executing a delivery mission, and Pentagon Communications has been deliberately excluded from mission awareness. Sir, authorized by whom? I don't show congressional notification for nuclear deployment. Hendricks accesses another classification level, revealing authorization sequences that trace back to National Security Council directives dated 6 weeks ago. Emergency authorization protocols, signed by officials whose names don't appear on standard chain-of-command rosters. The authorization codes verify as legitimate, but the mission parameters remain classified above my clearance. Congressional notification occurs after successful mission completion. Current authorization derives from Article 2 executive powers during classified threat response. Classified threat response. Executive authorization. Emergency protocols that bypass normal congressional oversight. I stare at the displays showing real-time nuclear mission coordination, watching data updates from bombers I'm supposed to be monitoring, but not actually controlling, and realize I've been functioning as operational security cover rather than communications monitor. What's the target? I ask, though part of me already knows the answer will reshape my understanding of American nuclear policy. Hendricks pauses at his command terminal, fingers hovering over classification keys that could reveal information I'm not sure I want to possess. The strategic display shows Bravo Wing maintaining formation over coordinates that don't correspond to any training targets or deterrent patrol zones. Target classification remains above your clearance. Mission designation: counterproliferation strike against unauthorized nuclear development facility. Counterproliferation. The euphemism for preventive nuclear attack, for destroying nuclear capabilities before they become nuclear threats. The kind of mission that officially doesn't exist in American strategic doctrine, that gets authorized through executive channels and executed under communications blackout to maintain plausible deniability. Whose nuclear development facility? Classification restricted. Mission success depends on operational security, which depends on limited information distribution. Limited information distribution. The intelligence community's phrase for keeping operations compartmentalized so completely that even the people executing them don't fully understand the implications. I look at the real-time mission displays, watch Bravo Wing's progress toward coordinates I'm not allowed to know, carrying nuclear payloads to destroy nuclear facilities belonging to adversaries I'm not allowed to identify. The mission timeline shows completion in approximately 90 minutes, with return to standard communication protocols scheduled for 0145 hours. Enough time for nuclear payload delivery, target assessment, and restoration of routine deterrent operations. Enough time for me to log tonight's events as communication equipment maintenance, to file reports that sanitize a preventive nuclear strike into administrative routine. Major, I need to understand my role in this operation. Your role is communications security. Tonight's activities remain classified under Strategic Authentication Protocol 7. No official record exists of nuclear delivery mission. Your logs will reflect routine communication interruption due to atmospheric interference. Atmospheric interference. The cover story that transforms an authorized nuclear strike into weather-related communication difficulty. I stare at the classified displays showing real-time mission progress, then at my own terminal, where I'm supposed to log tonight's events as routine operational challenges. The fluorescent hum continues at exactly 60 Hz, same frequency as the powered grid, same frequency as the cognitive dissonance spreading through my understanding of nuclear deterrence policy. Somewhere over the Pacific, Colonel Reese is preparing to deliver nuclear weapons in a mission that officially never happened, while I sit in Pentagon Communications maintaining the fiction that tonight's silence represents equipment problems rather than policy implementation. What happens if I refuse to log this as atmospheric interference? Hendricks accesses one final classification level, revealing protocols for operational security breach containment. The procedures include immediate reassignment to classified detention facilities, indefinite security review, and potential prosecution under the Espionage Act. The kind of consequences that end military careers and civilian freedoms simultaneously. Your cooperation maintains operational security for authorized national defense activities. Non-cooperation constitutes security breach requiring immediate containment. Security breach requiring immediate containment. The phrase echoes through sublevel 3, bouncing off equipment racks and disappearing into the steady electronic hum. I look at the mission displays showing nuclear weapon delivery in real time, at the classification protocols that make tonight's operation simultaneously legal and non-existent, at Hendricks waiting for my cooperation in making a nuclear strike disappear into administrative records. 58 minutes of silence, and I understand that silence isn't communication failure. Silence is policy. The classified displays continue updating, showing Bravo Wing's progress toward coordinates I'm forbidden to know, while my fingers hover over standard communication protocols that no longer apply. Hendricks returns to his station, the briefing complete, the operational reality established. I'm part of a nuclear strike now, whether I chose to be or not. But something in the mission data doesn't align with the counterproliferation briefing Hendricks just provided. The target coordinates place Bravo Wing over international waters, not territorial airspace where unauthorized nuclear facilities would exist. The flight path tracking shows them approaching shipping lanes, not land-based installations. Counterproliferation strikes target fixed facilities, research reactors, enrichment plants, weapons assembly sites, not oceanic coordinates where only civilian maritime traffic operates. I access the meteorological data overlay through my standard clearance, cross-referencing atmospheric conditions with the target zone coordinates Hendricks revealed. Clear weather, minimal interference, optimal visibility for precision targeting. But optimal targeting of what? The coordinate analysis shows deep ocean, thousands of feet of water above abyssal seafloor. No infrastructure, no facilities, no targets that match any counterproliferation mission parameters I've studied. Major, the target coordinates show open ocean. No fixed installations. Hendricks stops reviewing his paperwork. The pause extends long enough that I know I've identified a discrepancy in the mission briefing, something that doesn't fit the authorized narrative he's constructed. Target classification remains above your clearance level, but counterproliferation doctrine targets fixed nuclear facilities. These coordinates don't show any infrastructure. Your doctrine knowledge is noted. Mission authorization derives from intelligence assessments beyond your clearance. Beyond my clearance. The phrase that ends inquiry, that stops questions, that maintains operational security through information compartmentalization. But the meteorological data remains accessible, and the coordinate analysis continues updating, showing Bravo Wing approaching a target zone that contradicts everything I know about nuclear strike doctrine. I switch to alternative data sources, accessing maritime traffic reports through standard Pentagon database connections available at my clearance level. The target coordinates intersect multiple commercial shipping routes, placing civilian vessels in proximity to nuclear weapon delivery zones. Standard counterproliferation doctrine includes extensive collateral damage assessment, civilian evacuation protocols, international notification requirements designed to minimize civilian casualties. None of these protective protocols appear in tonight's mission data. Sir, maritime traffic shows civilian shipping in the target zone. Collateral damage assessment protocols haven't been implemented. This gets Hendricks' complete attention. He accesses the same maritime data, reviews the shipping traffic reports, then pulls up classification levels that reveal information I hadn't considered. The civilian vessels aren't incidental traffic. They're part of the target assessment. Operation frequency clear includes neutralization of unauthorized nuclear transport. Target designation: Maritime Nuclear Proliferation Vessel. Maritime Nuclear Proliferation Vessel. The classification makes the mission parameters align with established doctrine, not counter-proliferation against fixed territorial installations, but interdiction of nuclear materials transport in international waters. This explains the oceanic coordinates, the civilian shipping proximity, the communications blackout designed to prevent international monitoring of nuclear interdiction operations. We're using nuclear weapons to stop nuclear weapons. Authorization protocols determine appropriate response to unauthorized nuclear transport. Current threat assessment requires immediate neutralization before materials reach territorial waters. The logic has that circular quality of classified operations, where secret intelligence justifies secret responses that create secret consequences. I examine the real-time tracking data, watching Bravo wing approach coordinates where a vessel supposedly carries nuclear materials that require nuclear neutralization. The operational security makes it impossible to verify the intelligence, impossible to assess the threat, impossible to evaluate the response proportionality. What's the evidence that the vessel carries nuclear materials? Hendricks accesses the intelligence classification protocols, revealing the source assessments that justify tonight's mission. Satellite imagery showing unusual radiation signatures, maritime surveillance detecting radioactive material transport, human intelligence confirming unauthorized nuclear trafficking. The evidence appears legitimate, but the classification prevents independent verification. Intelligence assessment indicates 90% probability of weapons-grade material transport requiring immediate interdiction. 90% probability. High confidence, but not certainty. Not the kind of intelligence that traditionally justifies nuclear weapon deployment. I look at the mission displays showing nuclear bombers approaching a target based on probable intelligence rather than confirmed threat, and realize I'm watching the implementation of preventive nuclear policy based on assessment rather than verification. Sir, what happens if the intelligence is wrong? The question hangs in sub-level 3's filtered air, mixing with the electronic hum and the quiet desperation of someone realizing they're part of something beyond their understanding or control. Hendricks reviews the intelligence protocols, the mission authorization sequences, the operational security requirements that make tonight's activities simultaneously legitimate and deniable. Intelligence assessment incorporates multiple verification sources. Probability calculations indicate acceptable risk parameters for authorized response. Acceptable risk parameters. The phrase that quantifies human lives into statistical abstractions, that transforms nuclear weapon deployment into risk management, that makes mass destruction mathematically acceptable under classified threat assessment. I watch the mission timeline showing weapon deployment in approximately 37 minutes, wondering how many people are about to die based on 90% probability calculations. The encrypted communication channels suddenly activate with voice transmission, not data bursts, but actual voice communication from Bravo Wing. Colonel Reese's voice, strained but professional, breaking operational security to establish direct contact with Pentagon Communications. Pentagon Com, this is Bravo Lead. Requesting confirmation of target authentication codes. Target authentication codes. The final verification sequence before nuclear weapon deployment. The last checkpoint between mission authorization and actual nuclear strike. Standard protocol requires Pentagon Communications to provide authentication confirmation, but tonight's operational security has compartmentalized that authority away from my clearance level. Bravo Lead, this is Pentagon Com. Authentication protocols are classified above this station's clearance. Pentagon Com, we're holding pattern over target coordinates. Visual confirmation shows civilian maritime traffic, not military vessel. Request target verification before weapon deployment. Visual confirmation. Civilian maritime traffic. Colonel Reese can see the target zone, can identify the vessels below, can assess the actual threat level based on direct observation rather than classified intelligence. His request for verification suggests the intelligence assessment doesn't match operational reality. Major, Bravo lead is requesting target verification. They're seeing civilian ships, not military vessels. Hendricks accesses the real-time intelligence feeds, comparing current satellite imagery with the original threat assessment. The displays show multiple vessels in the target zone, commercial cargo ships, civilian transport, maritime traffic that matches normal shipping patterns rather than nuclear proliferation operations. Intelligence assessment indicates nuclear materials concealed within civilian shipping. Target authentication remains valid. Nuclear materials concealed within civilian shipping. The intelligence assessment has evolved from maritime nuclear proliferation vessel to civilian ships carrying hidden nuclear materials. The threat has shifted from military nuclear transport to civilian vessel contamination, requiring nuclear strikes against commercial shipping to prevent nuclear proliferation. Bravo lead, authentication codes classified above station clearance. Proceed with mission parameters under existing authorization. Colonel Reese's response comes after a pause long enough to suggest internal discussion among Bravo wing crew members. Pentagon comm, mission parameters indicate single military vessel, not multiple civilian ships. Current visual shows standard maritime traffic. Requesting mission abort until target verification complete. Mission abort, the phrase that stops nuclear strikes, that prevents nuclear weapon deployment, that requires authorization levels beyond anything Hendricks has revealed tonight. I watched the classified displays showing real-time mission status while listening to Bravo lead requesting verification that could prevent nuclear strikes against civilian shipping. Major, they're requesting mission abort based on target verification failure. Hendricks accesses authorization protocols I didn't know existed, revealing command structure that extends beyond Pentagon communications, beyond strategic command, beyond the normal military chain of command. Emergency authorization sequences that place nuclear mission authority in agencies I've never heard of, with officials whose names don't appear in standard government rosters. Mission abort requires authorization from Raven Station. Pentagon Communications lacks authority to modify authorized nuclear mission. Raven Station, the mobile command center coordinating tonight's operation, the authority that bypasses normal military command structure, the source of authorization that makes nuclear strikes possible without congressional oversight or Pentagon control. I realize that Pentagon Communications isn't coordinating tonight's nuclear mission. We're monitoring it while other authorities control it. Pentagon comm, this is Bravo lead. We're military officers with constitutional oath to prevent unauthorized nuclear weapon deployment. Current target assessment indicates potential civilian casualties without confirmed military necessity. Requesting direct communication with authorization source. Constitutional oath. Military necessity. The principles that govern nuclear weapon deployment, that require confirmed threats before nuclear response, that make officers responsible for verifying targets before delivering nuclear destruction. Colonel Reese is invoking the legal and ethical framework that governs nuclear operations, demanding verification before proceeding with strikes against questionable targets. Bravo lead, authorization sources classified. Proceed with mission parameters under existing executive authorization. Executive authorization, the constitutional basis for tonight's nuclear strike, the legal foundation that makes presidential approval sufficient for nuclear weapon deployment without congressional declaration or military verification. The authority that transforms classified intelligence into authorized nuclear response, regardless of target verification or civilian casualties. Pentagon comm, executive authorization requires imminent threat to national security. Current target assessment shows civilian shipping with unconfirmed nuclear materials. This doesn't meet constitutional requirements for nuclear weapon deployment. The communication channel fills with silence that feels different from equipment failure or operational security. This silence carries the weight of constitutional crisis, of military officers questioning executive authority, of nuclear mission parameters that don't align with legal requirements for nuclear weapon deployment. Major, what are the constitutional requirements for nuclear strikes? Hendricks accesses legal protocols that exist at classification levels beyond normal military training, revealing the legal framework that governs nuclear weapon deployment. The Constitution requires imminent threat to national security, congressional authorization for military action, and proportional response to verified threats. Tonight's mission operates under emergency executive powers that bypass these requirements during classified threat response. Emergency executive authorization supersedes normal constitutional requirements during classified national security threats. But the Constitution doesn't include exceptions for classified threats. Military officers have legal obligation to verify targets before nuclear deployment. Your constitutional interpretation is noted. Mission authorization derives from executive powers that supersede individual officer discretion. Individual officer discretion. The phrase that eliminates military judgment from nuclear operations, that makes nuclear strikes automatic rather than verified, that transforms nuclear weapons into administrative tools rather than military weapons. I watch the displays showing nuclear mission progress while constitutional law dissolves into executive authority and classified operations. The encrypted communication channel activates with transmission from multiple aircraft. Not just Colonel Reese, but other pilots in Bravo Wing, voices suggesting internal discussion about mission parameters and target verification. Pentagon Comm, this is Bravo 2. We're military officers bound by constitutional oath and international law. Current mission parameters may constitute war crime under nuclear weapon deployment protocols. We're requesting legal review before proceeding with nuclear strikes. War crime, international law. The legal framework that governs nuclear weapon deployment, that requires confirmed military necessity before nuclear strikes, that makes unauthorized nuclear attacks violations of international treaties and domestic law. The pilots are invoking legal protections that exist beyond executive authorization or operational security. Bravo Wing, legal review is classified above Pentagon communications clearance. Proceed with authorized mission under executive command authority. Pentagon Comm, we're holding formation over target coordinates pending legal clarification. Nuclear weapon deployment requires confirmed military necessity under both domestic and international law. Current target assessment doesn't meet legal requirements. The mission timeline shows weapon deployment scheduled in 18 minutes, but Bravo Wing has essentially stopped following mission parameters, demanding legal verification before proceeding with nuclear strikes. The classified displays show mission status as holding pending authorization, while the pilots invoke constitutional and international law to prevent nuclear weapon deployment. Major, what happens when military officers refuse nuclear mission orders? Hendricks accesses protocols for military insubordination during nuclear operations, revealing procedures for handling officer refusal to execute authorized nuclear strikes. Court-martial proceedings, treason charges, immediate arrest upon return to base. The consequences for refusing nuclear orders include life imprisonment or execution under military law. Military refusal to execute authorized nuclear mission constitutes mutiny under wartime authority. Immediate consequences include arrest and court-martial under capital charges. Capital charges: life imprisonment or execution for refusing to deploy nuclear weapons against questionable targets. The ultimate enforcement mechanism for nuclear operations, the legal framework that makes nuclear strikes mandatory, regardless of officer discretion or constitutional concerns. But something has changed in the communication patterns. The encrypted channels show data transmission between Bravo Wing aircraft, coordination that suggests collective decision-making rather than individual refusal. Not one pilot questioning orders, but multiple aircraft coordinating response to questionable mission parameters. Pentagon Comm, this is Bravo Lead. Bravo Wing is declaring operational pause pending target verification. We're military officers with constitutional obligation to prevent unauthorized nuclear deployment. Current mission doesn't meet legal standards for nuclear weapon use. Operational pause. The phrase that stops nuclear missions, that requires higher authorization to override, that makes nuclear strikes conditional rather than automatic. But operational pause during nuclear missions triggers emergency protocols, national security responses, consequences that extend beyond military discipline into homeland security and federal law enforcement. Bravo Lead, operational pause during authorized nuclear mission constitutes national security breach. Immediate consequences include federal arrest and prosecution under espionage law. Espionage law, federal prosecution. The legal framework that makes military officers into domestic terrorists for refusing questionable nuclear orders, that transforms constitutional obligation into federal crime, that makes nuclear weapon deployment mandatory regardless of target verification or legal concerns. The classified displays suddenly shift, showing new data streams from agencies beyond Pentagon communications, beyond strategic command, beyond the normal military command structure. Federal agencies coordinating response to military refusal, Homeland Security protocols for handling nuclear mission insubordination, emergency powers that make tonight's events into domestic security threats requiring immediate containment. Lieutenant, you're witnessing classified national security breach requiring immediate operational security protocols. Operational security protocols. The procedures for containing security breaches, for managing unauthorized disclosure of classified operations, for preventing information about tonight's nuclear mission from reaching unauthorized personnel. The protocols that make me part of the security breach simply by witnessing it. Somewhere over the Pacific, Bravo Wing continues holding formation above coordinates I'm not supposed to know, refusing to deploy nuclear weapons against targets they can't verify, while federal agencies coordinate response to military officers invoking constitutional law to prevent nuclear strikes that may or may not be legal. The electronic hum continues at exactly 60 Hz, same frequency as national power grid, same frequency as the constitutional crisis developing in real time above international waters. Tonight's silence isn't communication failure or operational security. Tonight's silence is the sound of nuclear policy fracturing along constitutional lines, with military officers, executive authority, and federal law enforcement colliding over the legal framework that governs nuclear weapon deployment. And I'm the communications officer logging it all as atmospheric interference. The silence breaks at 0347 hours with a transmission that bypasses Pentagon communications entirely. Not voice communication from Bravo Wing, not data burst from Raven Station, but direct satellite feed from Naval Intelligence that activates the displays without my authorization, without clearance verification, without any of the security protocols that normally govern classified intelligence access in Sublevel 3. On the screen, for civilian cargo vessels in standard shipping formation, transponder codes identifying Korean commercial freight, Liberian container transport, two smaller vessels showing registry from maritime nations whose flags appear in normal Pacific shipping manifests. No military vessels, no radiation signatures, no unusual electromagnetic patterns that would indicate nuclear materials transport, just civilian shipping following established commercial routes through international waters. But something else appears in the satellite imagery that explains the intelligence discrepancy. A fifth vessel, maintaining position approximately 2 nautical miles from the commercial shipping cluster, using the civilian ships as operational cover. No transponder identification, no registry flags, no commercial characteristics. This vessel displays heat signatures consistent with nuclear reactor operation, electromagnetic patterns matching weapons-grade material storage, radiation emissions that confirm active nuclear payload. The intelligence assessment was accurate, nuclear proliferation threat confirmed, but the targeting analysis was incomplete. Not nuclear materials concealed within civilian shipping, but an unauthorized nuclear vessel using commercial maritime traffic as cover, exploiting normal shipping patterns to transport weapons-grade materials through international waters without detection. Major satellite imagery shows unauthorized nuclear vessel using civilian ships as cover. Hendricks reviews the new intelligence data, comparing current satellite feeds with original threat assessment. The mission parameters were correct about nuclear proliferation threat, but wrong about target identification. Nuclear interdiction required, but not against civilian vessels, against military nuclear transport using civilian shipping as shield. Intelligence assessment confirmed. Target authentication updated for actual nuclear threat vessel. The encrypted communication channels activate with new transmission from Bravo Wing, Colonel Reese's voice carrying different tone than earlier constitutional objections. Professional military assessment rather than legal protest, tactical evaluation rather than ethical concern. Pentagon Comm, this is Bravo Lead. We have visual confirmation of non-civilian vessel in target zone. Heat signatures and electromagnetic patterns consistent with nuclear payload transport. Requesting updated targeting coordinates for confirmed military target. Confirmed military target. The phrase that transforms tonight's constitutional crisis into legitimate nuclear interdiction operation, that makes nuclear weapon deployment legal under both domestic and international law, that resolves the legal questions about civilian casualties and unauthorized nuclear strikes. Bravo Lead, updated targeting coordinates transmitting now. Authentication codes verified for nuclear interdiction against confirmed military nuclear transport. But the tactical situation has created new complications. The unauthorized nuclear vessel maintains position within civilian shipping pattern, using commercial cargo ships as human shields to prevent nuclear interdiction. Standard nuclear targeting doctrine prohibits strikes that cause civilian casualties, but nuclear interdiction doctrine requires immediate neutralization of nuclear proliferation threats regardless of collateral damage considerations. Pentagon Comm, nuclear vessel is positioned within civilian shipping cluster. Nuclear strike will cause significant civilian casualties. Requesting alternative interdiction methods. Alternative interdiction methods. Conventional weapons against nuclear transport vessel, special operations boarding, maritime interdiction that doesn't require nuclear weapon deployment. Options that prevent nuclear proliferation without civilian casualties, that meet legal requirements without triggering international incidents. Bravo lead, nuclear vessel positioning within civilian traffic is intentional exploitation of international law to prevent interdiction. Nuclear response authorized to prevent nuclear proliferation regardless of civilian proximity. The legal framework has shifted again. Not constitutional crisis about unauthorized nuclear strikes, but international law conflict about nuclear interdiction versus civilian protection. The unauthorized nuclear vessel is using civilians as human shields, making nuclear interdiction technically legal, but ethically complicated. Hendricks accesses intelligence protocols that reveal the full scope of tonight's operation. The nuclear vessel isn't random nuclear proliferation. It's part of coordinated nuclear trafficking network, transporting weapons-grade materials to state actors who don't appear on official nuclear powers lists. Interdiction tonight prevents nuclear materials from reaching destinations where they'd be developed into nuclear weapons targeting United States interests. Lieutenant, the nuclear vessel is delivering weapons-grade materials to unauthorized nuclear program. Failure to interdict results in nuclear weapons development outside international oversight. Nuclear weapons development outside international oversight. The threat that justifies nuclear interdiction despite civilian casualties, that makes tonight's nuclear strikes preventive rather than aggressive, that transforms potential war crime into legal nuclear counterproliferation operation. But new intelligence updates through the satellite feeds reveal a tactical complication that transforms the entire operation scope. The civilian vessels aren't random commercial shipping being exploited for cover. They're part of the nuclear trafficking coordination, each carrying specific components: uranium enrichment centrifuges, weapons assembly equipment, nuclear facility construction materials. Not innocent ships being used as shields, but a coordinated nuclear weapons development shipment using multiple vessels to transport complete nuclear capability. Pentagon Comm, this is Bravo lead. Updated satellite analysis shows multiple vessels carrying nuclear-related cargo. This isn't single nuclear transport. It's complete nuclear weapons development shipment. Complete nuclear weapons development shipment. The intelligence assessment that makes tonight's nuclear interdiction mission critical to national security, that justifies nuclear strikes against entire shipping cluster, that transforms civilian casualties from collateral damage into necessary casualties preventing nuclear proliferation. The mission timeline shows weapon deployment in 7 minutes, but now the targeting coordinates include all vessels in the cluster. Not single nuclear interdiction, but comprehensive nuclear counterproliferation strike against coordinated nuclear trafficking network. Bravo Wing, updated mission parameters authorize nuclear strikes against all vessels in target cluster. Confirmed nuclear proliferation network requires complete neutralization to prevent nuclear weapons development. The encrypted communication channels fill with coordinated responses from all Bravo Wing aircraft, pilots acknowledging updated mission parameters while requesting final confirmation of nuclear strike authorization against multiple civilian-flagged vessels carrying nuclear weapons development materials. Pentagon Comm, Bravo Wing confirms nuclear proliferation network interdiction. Multiple nuclear weapons deployment against civilian-flagged vessels under anti-proliferation authorization. Proceeding with comprehensive nuclear strike in 4 minutes. For minutes until nuclear weapon deployment against shipping cluster carrying nuclear weapons development materials to unauthorized nuclear program. The constitutional crisis has resolved into legitimate nuclear counterproliferation operation, but the scope has expanded from single vessel interdiction to comprehensive nuclear strike against coordinated proliferation network. I watched the classified displays showing real-time mission progress, nuclear bombers approaching weapon deployment coordinates, targeting systems locked onto civilian-flagged vessels carrying confirmed nuclear proliferation materials. The legal questions about constitutional authority and international law have been answered by intelligence confirmation of nuclear trafficking network. But new data appears on the satellite feeds that wasn't visible in earlier assessments. Additional vessels approaching the target coordinates from different directions, maritime traffic that wasn't part of original shipping pattern. Not random vessels, but coordinated movement suggesting larger nuclear trafficking operation than initial intelligence indicated. Major satellite shows additional vessels converging on target coordinates. The nuclear trafficking network is larger than original assessment. Hendrix accesses expanded intelligence feeds, revealing the full scope of nuclear proliferation operation. Not single shipping cluster carrying nuclear materials, but multiple coordinated shipments converging at predetermined coordinates to transfer nuclear weapons development materials between various state and non-state actors. Tonight's interdiction prevents nuclear materials transfer that would distribute weapons-grade materials to multiple unauthorized nuclear programs. Intelligence assessment confirms major nuclear proliferation transfer operation. Multiple state actors coordinating nuclear materials distribution. Nuclear interdiction prevents weapons-grade materials from reaching multiple unauthorized nuclear programs. Multiple unauthorized nuclear programs. The threat assessment that justifies comprehensive nuclear response, that makes tonight's strikes preventive war against nuclear proliferation rather than military action against single threat. Nuclear weapons deployment to prevent nuclear weapons development by multiple adversary nations and terrorist organizations. Pentagon Com, this is Bravo lead. Comprehensive nuclear strike against multiple nuclear proliferation targets. Weapon deployment in 90 seconds. Confirming authorization for nuclear counterproliferation operation. 90 seconds until nuclear weapon deployment against nuclear proliferation network. The classified displays show multiple nuclear warheads targeting multiple vessels carrying nuclear materials to multiple unauthorized nuclear programs. Not single nuclear interdiction, but comprehensive nuclear counterproliferation strike that prevents nuclear weapons development by multiple adversary actors. Bravo Wing, nuclear counterproliferation authorization confirmed. Proceed with nuclear weapons deployment against confirmed nuclear trafficking network. The communication channels go silent as nuclear bombers complete final targeting sequences. No more voice communication, no more authentication requests, no more legal questions about constitutional authority or international law. Just electronic signals confirming nuclear weapon deployment systems active and targeting coordinates locked. At 0352 hours, the satellite feeds show multiple bright flashes above the Pacific coordinates, nuclear warheads detonating against nuclear proliferation network, comprehensive nuclear strikes eliminating nuclear materials transport and weapons development capability before reaching unauthorized nuclear programs. The classified displays update with post-strike assessment data. 7 vessels destroyed, nuclear materials neutralized, nuclear trafficking network eliminated. No nuclear proliferation materials reached intended destinations. Nuclear weapons development prevented from multiple adversary nations and terrorist organizations. Mission successful. Nuclear counterproliferation operation completed. Threat eliminated. But the post-strike satellite imagery reveals intelligence that wasn't accessible through pre-strike assessment protocols. Debris patterns from the destroyed vessels contain radioactive signatures indicating the ships carried not just nuclear development materials, but operational nuclear warheads. Not preventing future weapons development, preventing immediate nuclear weapons distribution to unauthorized actors. The nuclear proliferation threat was more immediate than intelligence indicated. Not preventing future nuclear weapons development, but preventing current nuclear weapons distribution. Tonight's nuclear strikes eliminated nuclear warheads that were hours away from reaching terrorist organizations and rogue states. Lieutenant, post-strike analysis confirms the vessels carried assembled nuclear warheads, not just nuclear materials. Tonight's nuclear interdiction prevented nuclear terrorism and unauthorized state nuclear capability. Nuclear terrorism. Unauthorized state nuclear capability. The threats that justify any level of nuclear response, that make civilian casualties mathematically acceptable, that transform potential international incident into necessary counterterrorism operation. Hendrix accesses final mission reports, classification protocols that will determine how tonight's nuclear strikes are recorded in official documentation. Not aggressive nuclear action, but defensive nuclear counterproliferation. Not civilian casualties, but collateral damage during legitimate nuclear interdiction. Not constitutional crisis, but successful counterterrorism operation. Mission classification, nuclear counterproliferation success. Official documentation, routine nuclear readiness exercise with simulated scenarios. Routine nuclear readiness exercise with simulated scenarios. The official record that makes tonight's nuclear strikes disappear into classified training documentation, that transforms nuclear weapon deployment into military exercise, that prevents congressional oversight or international investigation. I review my communication logs from tonight's operation, the electronic records that document my role in nuclear counterproliferation mission. The logs show routine communication monitoring, standard protocol compliance, normal Pentagon communications operation during classified exercise. No record of constitutional crisis. No documentation of legal questions. No evidence of nuclear strikes against civilian-flagged vessels. No trace of nuclear warheads eliminated hours before nuclear terrorism deployment. Just atmospheric interference during routine communication exercise. The electronic hum continues at exactly 60 Hz, same frequency as national power grid, same frequency as constitutional government operating within legal framework. Tonight's silence wasn't communication failure or operational security. Tonight's silence was nuclear policy functioning as designed, preventing nuclear proliferation through nuclear interdiction while maintaining plausible deniability through operational security and classification protocols. At 0400 hours, standard communication protocols resume as Colonel Reese's voice returns on normal channels, professional military tone consistent with routine training completion. Pentagon COM, this is Bravo lead. Exercise parameters complete. Bravo wing returning to base under standard flight operations. Training exercise complete. Nuclear bombers returning to base. Mission accomplished. Somewhere in the Pacific, elevated radiation readings will persist for decades above coordinates that exist only in classified databases, above vessels that sailed under false registry, above nuclear materials that were intercepted by counterproliferation operations that maintain plausible deniability through operational security protocols. The elevated radiation will register on Pacific monitoring stations as natural background variation, consistent with atmospheric nuclear testing residue that's been part of the ocean environment since 1950s nuclear test programs. Nothing requiring investigation. Nothing warranting international monitoring. Just routine background radiation in international waters where legitimate nuclear testing occurred decades ago. I complete my shift log with standard entries. Routine communication monitoring, normal protocol compliance, successful completion of classified training exercise involving simulated nuclear scenarios. The log gets filed with Pentagon communications records, archived under classification protocols that prevent review without authorization levels that don't exist. Tomorrow, different officers will monitor different frequencies, conducting routine operations that maintain nuclear readiness through regular training exercises with simulated scenarios. The cycle continues, the protocols function, the system operates within legal framework. But during late-night shifts when atmospheric conditions create unusual interference patterns, Pentagon Communications sometimes monitors frequencies that carry signals inconsistent with standard communication protocols. Voices from aircraft crews conducting classified operations, coordinates that don't appear in official navigation databases, mission parameters that exist within classification levels above congressional oversight. The frequencies are always atmospheric interference. The voices are always training exercises. The coordinates are always simulated scenarios. Until they're not. And when they're not, Pentagon Communications documents them as routine atmospheric interference during classified training exercises with simulated nuclear scenarios. Because that's what maintains national security through plausible deniability and operational security protocols that prevent unauthorized disclosure of nuclear operations that officially never occur. The electronic hum continues at exactly 60 Hz. Same frequency as constitutional democracy functioning within legal framework. Same frequency as nuclear policy operating through classified protocols. Same frequency as the silence between official documentation and operational reality.